The cabin lights hummed above, a sterile white glow that made every polished surface gleam, and every passenger squirm. Mariah Lawson gripped the armrest of her first-class seat, listening to the rhythmic squeak of her designer heels against the aisle carpet as a uniformed officer stepped forward. His badge caught the light, glinting like a warning. "You," he said, pointing a finger that trembled with authority more than intent. "Step out with me." Shock froze Mariah in place. Around her, the chatter dimmed. The low murmur of the flight attendants became a tense background hum. She adjusted her scarf, feeling the weight of judgment in the officer's stare, the invisible lines drawn between him and her skin. "Excuse me," she asked, voice steady but sharp. "You heard me." "Come on," he insisted. The man's tone carried the kind of power that erased questions, replaced with fear and compliance. Other passengers shuffled uneasily, phones subtly raised, some whispering. Mariah's heart pounded, not from fear of flying, not from turbulence, but from the audacity of being singled out for nothing but who she was. Her eyes caught the reflection of her name badge clipped discreetly to her purse. Lawson Airlines, founder and CEO. The officer's eyes didn't flicker. His voice dropped to a whisper, cruel in its precision. "You don't belong here." Mariah's stomach sank. The aisle felt narrower, the fluorescent lights brighter, the air suddenly too thin. And then, as the cabin door slid open behind them, a thought hit her like a punch. The man had no idea who she really was. And by the time he found out, it would be too late. The terminal buzzed with its usual chaos. Rolling suitcases, distant announcements, the low hum of engines. Mariah Lawson adjusted her scarf and glanced at her boarding pass, scanning the gate number. She had flown hundreds of times, but today felt different, a subtle tension she couldn't shake. Officer Craig Benson stepped into the first-class line, his polished badge catching the overhead light. "Ma'am," he said, voice sharp, "I need to speak with you." Mariah's eyes narrowed, hand tightening around her designer handbag. "Is there a problem, officer?" "You," he said, pointing without explanation. "Step aside." Passengers paused mid-stride, watching. Some whispered. A child clutched his mother's sleeve. Mariah stood, straightening her posture, the first instinct to comply warring with disbelief. "I think you're mistaken," she said. Her tone was calm, measured, but there was steel beneath it. "I'm cleared for this flight. Boarding pass, ID." Benson waved her words away. "Don't argue. Now." The officer's eyes flicked over her from head to toe, the unspoken judgment radiating in every glance. Mariah's mind raced. This is absurd. I have every right to be here. Her pulse quickened, but she stayed silent, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of a confrontation rooted in fear. Other passengers began murmuring. "What's going on?" a young man asked quietly. Mariah noticed the uneasy glances, the subtle distancing of those who feared entanglement. She felt the weight of isolation, a reminder that the officer's authority carried unspoken consequences. "I said, come with me," Benson repeated, his tone cutting to the hum of the terminal like a knife. "Now." Mariah swallowed, feeling her heartbeat in her throat. Her eyes flicked down at the small badge on her purse. Lawson Airlines, founder and CEO. For a heartbeat, she considered revealing it, letting him understand the magnitude of his misjudgment. But something held her back. Pride, strategy, caution. Instead, she lifted her chin and followed. The officer's grip on procedure felt like chains, invisible but suffocating. Around them, whispers followed, a symphony of disbelief, fear, and silent protest. A flight attendant glanced their way, expression tight with concern. The office door loomed ahead, a small, stark room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and tension. Mariah's stomach churned. She had faced boardrooms, hostile meetings, even aggressive passengers, but never this, a raw, untempered abuse of power rooted in skin and nothing else. "You think you belong here," Benson said, stepping aside to let her in, "but you don't." The words landed like a punch. Mariah's breath caught, and her fingers itched to record, to document, to prove. She had endured countless microaggressions, systemic dismissals, but this was overt, cinematic in its cruelty. And yet, beneath the anger, a plan began to form, a quiet, simmering resolve that this man would learn exactly who he had humiliated. As the door closed behind them, sealing the space with an oppressive finality, Mariah exhaled slowly. The room was small, the fluorescent light harsh. Outside, the terminal buzzed, oblivious, and in that silence, she realized, the real turbulence had only just begun. The small office smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a fluorescent bulb buzzing faintly overhead. Mariah Lawson sat in the metal chair, its cold edges pressing into her back. Her purse rested on her lap, hands clutching it like a lifeline. Officer Craig Benson stood near the door, arms crossed, every inch the picture of authority, but authority rooted in arrogance and bias. "You understand why I stopped you?" he asked, voice low, measured, like he was savoring her discomfort. "I'd like to know," Mariah said, keeping her tone calm. She shifted slightly, the chair squeaking beneath her. "I've followed every protocol, have my boarding pass, ID. Everything is in order." Benson leaned forward, fingers drumming against his thigh. "You were acting suspicious. You know how many incidents we've had with passengers trying to bypass security? Rules are rules, ma'am." "Suspicious how?" Mariah asked. She tried to keep the tremor out of her voice, though her chest was tight. "Because I'm black?" Benson's eyes narrowed. "I said suspicious. Don't get smart with me." She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Officer Benson, I am CEO of this airline. I've flown these routes hundreds of times. I know the rules better than most of your staff here. And yet, you stop me in front of a plane full of passengers and imply wrongdoing based on nothing but assumption." He tapped his badge. "Doesn't matter who you are. Compliance is mandatory. Step out, answer questions, and let me do my job." Mariah's jaw tightened. The absurdity of it made her skin crawl. This is power exercise without thought. Prejudice dressed as procedure. She leaned forward slightly. "Do you know who I am?" Benson's lips twitched, half smile, half sneer. "I don't need to. I enforce rules." Her fingers moved subtly under the purse, pressing the record button on her phone. One accidental gesture she hadn't meant for the office, but could capture every word, every micro-expression, every abuse of authority. The officer leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "I've dealt with people like you before. You think your status makes you untouchable. It doesn't." Mariah's pulse spiked. The statement, delivered so casually, exposed his view of her existence. She was already less than in his mind, regardless of achievements. "I am not a problem for you to solve," she said, calm but biting. "I am a professional, following protocol. And yet you decided to weaponize your badge against me to humiliate me." Benson chuckled softly. "Humiliate? Maybe I'm just doing my job." "Your job," she said, voice rising slightly, "isn't to prove a point. It's to ensure safety. You're here using fear as authority, not rules. And you are failing both morally and professionally." The officer's hand twitched. He leaned back, pretending to consider her words, though his eyes betrayed irritation. The room was silent for a long moment, the hum of the fluorescent light the only sound. Outside, distant voices and rolling luggage reminded her how public this was, how easily it could escalate, and how helpless she would seem if no one intervened. "Do you have any proof you're telling the truth?" he asked finally. Mariah pressed the record button fully. "This phone is recording everything," she said, holding it casually. "Every word, every action. I don't want to escalate, Officer Benson, but I will protect myself." He stared, expression flickering between irritation and disbelief. "You think a phone recording can protect you?" "I think documentation of abuse of power is not just protection, it's accountability," she said. Her voice was soft, but the conviction behind it hit harder than any shout. There was a pause. Mariah could feel his gaze, sharp and calculating. "You're playing games," he said finally. "Not games. Facts," she corrected. She leaned back, releasing a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her thoughts raced. "If I push too hard, he'll detain me. If I push too soft, this will become a story of humiliation, not justice." A faint knock came to the door. A junior officer poked his head in. "Sir, Flight 214 is waiting. Benson waved him off, but Mariah noticed a young man's hesitance, the slight shift in posture, the unease of someone recognizing injustice. She stored the image mentally. Allies exist, even in silent forms. Benson turned back to her. You think because you're successful, people will side with you? I don't think, Mariah said, eyes locking with his. I know. People will side with facts, and if you do your job correctly, you will too. You're failing that test right now. He grunted, a sound meant to dismiss her, but failing entirely. The tension in the room thickened, unspoken. Her patience against his prejudice, calm against arrogance, dignity against raw power. I need you to step outside, he said finally, voice clipped. We're going to have a little chat with the airline representatives. Mariah's pulse raced. You're going to humiliate me in front of my employees, she said. Do you understand that this is not just an interaction? This is my company, my reputation, and you're jeopardizing both over nothing. Benson's lips tightened. Rules are rules, ma'am. We'll see what happens next. She pressed her phone slightly against her thigh, recording. Every moment mattered. This was no longer about a plane or a boarding pass. It was about systemic bias, unchecked authority, and the ripple effects of public humiliation. The office door opened again. A flight attendant, face pale, stepped in. Sir, maybe we can handle this calmly. Benson waved her off, eyes still fixed on Mariah. The room felt smaller, air heavier. Mariah caught the subtle glance of sympathy from the attendant, the fleeting hope in the young officer's expression. She drew a slow breath. This isn't over, she said softly. And when it is, you'll answer for every word you've said. Benson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he motioned toward the door. Mariah rose, purse in hand, and followed. Her mind raced, calculating every step, every possible consequence. She wasn't powerless. She had strategy, resources, and the truth. But the tension pressed against her chest like a vice. The corridor stretched ahead, fluorescent lights flickering faintly, echoing with the distant rumble of passengers and rolling luggage. Mariah's heels clicked against the tile with measured precision. Every step a statement. She would not crumble. She would not disappear. She would not be silenced. Benson walked beside her, rigid, all authority and arrogance, unaware that every step was being documented, every word preserved. And while he imagined control, Mariah imagined the storm that would follow. One phone, one recording, one moment, and suddenly the balance of power was no longer entirely his. The corridor ended at the gate lounge. Outside, passengers waited, some confused, some uneasy. Cameras subtly raised, whispers traveling like wildfire. Mariah's lips curved faintly. The next move belonged to her, and somewhere deep, beneath the indignation and adrenaline, she felt the first glimmer of satisfaction. She had survived the initial assault, and soon the world would see him for what he truly was. The hum of the terminal outside the side room felt distant, as if filtered through a thick wall of tension. Passengers shuffled, whispered, and shifted in their seats, the air thick with anticipation and discomfort. Mariah Lawson followed Officer Benson's rigid steps back to the main gate lounge, every click of her heels punctuating the officer's overbearing authority. Passengers leaned toward one another, barely hiding their curiosity. Some glanced at phones, others whispered into the ears of companions, eyes flicking toward the unfolding drama. A man in a business suit muttered, "Can you believe this?" She did nothing. A mother tightened her grip on her child, a mixture of concern and fear reflected in her eyes. Benson gestured toward the small waiting area. "Sit." His tone left no room for negotiation. Mariah complied, taking the seat with deliberate calm. The leather chair dug into her back, cold and unyielding. She let her gaze sweep the room subtly. Among the passengers, she recognized a familiar hierarchy of reactions. Silent complicity, whispered dissent, nervous curiosity. The young man from before, the hesitant officer, lingered near the edge of the crowd, hands stuffed in pockets, torn between intervention and self-preservation. One of the flight attendants approached, voice barely audible. "Ma'am, they're all watching. Some are whispering. Some are just—" "They're human," Mariah said softly. cutting her off. Fear and silence are easier than confrontation. It doesn't mean they don't understand. Benson, standing nearby with arms crossed, overheard. "You think they care about your opinion?" he asked. His voice dripped with derision, authority masquerading as concern. Mariah met his gaze evenly. "They care about justice. They may not act yet, but they know when someone is wronged." The officer snorted. "Justice? You're standing here lecturing while I enforce rules. You don't get to redefine authority just because it doesn't fit your narrative." Her lips pressed together to keep from snapping. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, voice firm but quiet, enough that only he could hear. "Authority isn't moral power, and rules aren't justice if they're applied selectively. That's the point you can't seem to grasp." A soft murmur ran through the waiting area. Several passengers exchanged looks, and Mariah noticed one woman lifting her phone subtly, documenting the interaction. The knowledge that silent witnesses existed, capturing truth in their own way, gave her a quiet satisfaction. She felt the weight of their observation, like a net of accountability closing slowly, inexorably. Benson's jaw tightened. "I enforce the law. That's all that matters." "And yet," Mariah said, voice rising slightly, "you let bias dictate whose law is enforced. You stop me for nothing, nothing visible, nothing actionable, but because of who I am. That's not law. That's prejudice in uniform." He glared, stepping closer. "Careful, ma'am. You're treading on dangerous ground. You want this to escalate." "I want fairness," she replied calm, but the underlying fire made the word sharp. "I want integrity. And yes, I want accountability. For you, for this institution, for everyone watching who silently tolerates this." Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered encouragement. Others averted their eyes. The young officer lingered near the edge of the gate lounge. He bit his lip, glanced at Benson, then back at Mariah. There was hesitation in his movements, the weight of morality pressing against his training, against his fear of reprisal. Benson barked, exasperated. "Enough talking. We're taking this further. Airline staff will accompany us." Mariah didn't flinch. "Fine. But know this. Every word you say, every microaggression, every unjust action is being recorded. Your career, your integrity, your credibility, it's all at risk. And this time there's evidence." The officer's teeth ground together, but he said nothing. He motioned to the flight attendants. "Lead the way." As Mariah followed him down the narrow corridor to a quieter conference room, she observed the subtle behaviors of bystanders. A middle-aged couple whispering to each other, a young woman hiding a camera in her bag, a teenager gripping her father's hand tightly. The room was filled with witnesses, not all brave, not all vocal, but present nonetheless. Presence was a kind of resistance, a subtle push against injustice. Inside the conference room, the airline representatives arrived, faces composed but alert. "Ma'am, we want to understand the situation," said one, a man named Leonard, mid-40s, suit impeccable but eyes betraying concern. "We were informed of an incident at the gate." Benson cleared his throat. "This passenger," he gestured toward Mariah, "was acting suspiciously and I had to investigate." Mariah held his gaze for a heartbeat, letting silence fill the room. "Acting suspiciously. That's it. Nothing more. There's no threat, no breach, nothing that justified this treatment, except perhaps the color of my skin." Leonard's eyes flicked toward Benson, then back to Mariah. He pursed his lips. "Officer Benson, do we have documentation?" Benson stiffened. No. Nothing formal yet. I observed behavior that warranted questioning." Mariah felt her pulse quicken, but she maintained composure. "Observing? That's an excuse. Observation without evidence is discrimination when applied selectively. And yes, I'm calling it what it is." The room went quiet. Leonard glanced at Mariah, then to Benson, silently weighing the tension. Mariah saw the subtle cracks, the officer's discomfort, the staff's awareness of wrongdoing, the unspoken acknowledgement that this interaction was morally, professionally wrong. A young attendant finally spoke, voice trembling slightly. "Sir, maybe we should let her explain calmly." She's not causing trouble. Benson's jaw twitched. I'm in charge here. Yes, Mariah said, voice measured. But being in charge doesn't make your actions right. It doesn't excuse prejudice. The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. The airline representatives exchanged glances. The passengers outside continued to murmur, some recording, some silently protesting with their gaze. Every second stretched, every whispered word, every subtle gesture reinforced the presence of accountability. Mariah's mind raced. Each person here is a witness. Each person who stays silent is a record of this moment, and those who act will remember. She took a slow breath, letting the weight of their observation bolster her resolve. Officer Benson, she said softly, turning her gaze fully on him, you may think you control this situation. You may think you intimidate me, but the truth exists outside your perception. You are being watched. You are being recorded. And someday all of this, your words, your actions, will be seen for what it truly is. The tension in the room thickened. Each moment dragged, suspended between fear, anger, and anticipation. Passengers, airline staff, and even reluctant officers became witnesses to a power struggle that transcended a single flight, a single incident. It was systemic, pervasive, and brutal, but now it was documented. Mariah's lips curved slightly. She would let the silence speak, let the witnesses whisper, let the world see the truth in their own way. The storm had begun, and Officer Benson, he had no idea just how far it would reach. Benson's shoulders stiffened, and for the first time, she saw hesitation flicker across his face. Mariah felt a subtle thrill, not from triumph, but from survival. Her calm, precise defiance had cracked his facade, revealing the human frailty beneath the uniform. The young officer at the edge of the room finally cleared his throat. Sir, maybe it's time to review this. Maybe with documentation. Maybe. Benson's eyes flicked toward him, sharp warning. But even his glare was tinged with uncertainty now. Mariah caught it, the slightest shift in balance. Outside, the terminal's whispers grew, like an undercurrent swelling toward a tide. She felt a quiet but undeniable energy, the knowledge that power, unchecked, was no longer invisible. Mariah adjusted her scarf, pressed the record button on her phone, and exhaled slowly. They're watching. I'm not alone. And he will have to answer for this. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and recycled air, sterile and official. Mariah Lawson sat across from Damon Fields, her lawyer, the tension of the terminal still thrumming in her chest. Beside her, a laptop hummed softly, emails pinging with updates from airline staff, passengers who had witnessed the incident, and legal aides preparing documentation. You did exactly the right thing by recording everything, Damon said, sliding a tablet toward her. This is more than harassment. It's abuse of power, discriminatory profiling, and potential grounds for civil action. Mariah pressed her lips together. It's surreal, Damon. To be humiliated in public, in front of my own staff, for no reason but my skin. And to think people see this as routine procedure. Routine for him, maybe, Damon said, but it's not routine for anyone else watching, especially when your position gives weight to the narrative. We can't erase the trauma, but we can make sure the system answers for it. Mariah sighed. Her gaze drifted to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. Outside, planes taxied, passengers boarded, oblivious to the storm brewing behind the gate lounge doors. Oblivious or complicit, she wondered. Damon leaned in. First, we file a formal complaint with the airport authorities. Then we notify the airline. Simultaneously, we draft a media strategy in case this leaks. It will, and it will go viral. Your story? It's going to resonate. Her hands tightened around the edge of the table. I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about systemic accountability. I want Officer Benson to understand that unchecked power has consequences. He will, Damon assured, but we have to tread carefully. Bureaucracy will attempt to dilute, deny, and redirect. The airport's internal affairs office will probably start by defending him. Mariah's jaw tightened. So, they'll protect a racist officer while I endure this humiliation? They'll try, Damon said. But you got proof, witnesses, and leverage. Remember, this isn't a small claim. It's public, documented, and morally undeniable. They can't just sweep it under the rug. Benson's face flashed briefly in her mind. Hard eyes, clenched jaw, the simmering need to assert dominance. She shivered at the memory. He didn't even hesitate, she whispered. The way he pointed at me, like I don't even know. Invisible? Inferior? Damon nodded. That's precisely the pattern we need to highlight. This isn't an isolated incident. It's systemic bias, enabled by uniforms and institutions that allow assumption to masquerade as procedure. And we can prove it. The office phone rang. Damon answered quickly, his tone shifting. Yes, she's here. Understood. He hung up, exhaling sharply. That was the airline's legal counsel. They want to coordinate before this escalates further. They know this is serious. Mariah leaned back, rubbing her temples. They know I'm the CEO, she said, almost bitterly. They have to. That's why they're careful. Exactly, Damon said, which means your identity adds pressure. They can't dismiss this lightly. But be aware, pressure doesn't guarantee morality. They will still negotiate, manipulate, and delay. Her phone vibrated. A notification from a passenger she recognized. Someone who had recorded parts of the terminal incident. They're sending their footage, she thought. A knot of both relief and apprehension formed. Evidence multiplied. But so did the exposure, the public stakes, the vulnerability. The sound of Benson's name in official memos, coupled with the airline's internal discussions, made her stomach twist. She hadn't yet seen the officer personally since the initial confrontation, but his presence lingered like a shadow. Damon noticed her expression. You're not powerless, he said, voice firm. You prepared. You've documented. You have witnesses. You're going to hold him accountable. But yes, the process will be slow, frustrating, and emotionally draining. That's the system's way of testing resolve. Mariah's thoughts drifted to the passengers, to the subtle looks, to the whispered words that trailed her as she was escorted. She pictured the young officer's hesitancy, the flight attendant's quiet concern, the woman surreptitiously recorded with her phone. They will matter, she thought. Their courage matters as much as mine. Later, she met with the airline counsel in a separate office, a larger, glass-walled room overlooking the runway. Leonard, the executive from before, sat across from her, flanked by two legal assistants. The conversation was calm but precise, every word measured. Ms. Lawson, we fully support your account, Leonard said. This officer acted outside protocol. There's no justification for his actions. We will assist you in documenting the incident and ensuring internal review. Mariah raised an eyebrow. Assist, meaning you'll contain the narrative? Or ensure accountability? Leonard nodded slowly. Accountability, but also clarity. We have to follow legal protocol, work with internal affairs, and ensure nothing is misrepresented. Nothing will be misrepresented, she said, voice steady. I have a recording. Witnesses. My staff saw everything. Passengers observed everything. The story is clear. Any attempt to dilute it will only compound your liability. Leonard glanced at Damon. We understand. We're here to prevent escalation. But we also have to follow procedure. Mariah leaned forward, voice soft but cutting. Procedures are important, but only if they're applied fairly. Officer Benson will be held responsible, not just for his actions, but for the systemic failures he represents. The meeting ended with nods, assurances, and a flurry of emails. But outside, Mariah felt emotional costs pressing against her chest. Every interaction, every step, every attempt at justice carried exhaustion. She had won small victories, but the battle was far from over. Later, in the quiet of her office aboard the plane, Mariah reflected. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, drafting notes, preparing statements. The hum of engines outside became a backdrop to her racing thoughts. How many people endure this without recourse? She wondered. How many are silenced because they don't have the means, the status, or the witnesses? Her reflection was interrupted by a message from a young officer who had hesitated in the terminal. I saw everything. You were right. You're doing the right thing. a small reassurance, but one that reminded her of the ripple effect. Every silent witness, every subtle act of courage mattered. The legal process loomed ahead. Meetings, filings, bureaucratic delays, internal investigations. Each step carried emotional weight and the risk of re-traumatization. But for the first time, she felt the power of preparation. She wasn't just reacting. She was controlling the narrative, ensuring truth had a platform, ensuring bias could not hide in shadows. Benson's actions had been bold, public, and indiscriminate. But now, exposure, documentation, and witnesses ensured that the tide was shifting. Mariah exhaled slowly, a mixture of exhaustion and determination. She would not let fear, shame, or bureaucratic delay deter her. She would navigate the shadows of the legal system, and she would make sure justice, not only for herself, but for everyone subjected to systemic bias, was seen, acknowledged, and enforced. In the quiet, she whispered to herself, "Power misused is power exposed." And he will learn that lesson. The office lights of Mariah Lawson's Airline headquarters flickered faintly as she stared at the laptop screen. Social media notifications surged like a tidal wave. Tweets, posts, videos. Passengers had shared her confrontation with Officer Benson across every platform imaginable. Hashtag stop racial profiling. Hashtag accountability now. Hashtag Lawson Airlines went viral in hours. "Ms. Lawson, you need to see this," Damon Field said, stepping beside her. His tablet displayed dozens of news clips, each covering the terminal incident. Some interviews included her passengers, quietly recounting how she had been singled out, her professional composure unwavering even under public humiliation. Mariah exhaled slowly, a mix of exhaustion and vindication. "I didn't want this. I never wanted it public. But it's happening." Damon nodded. "And that's good. This isn't just about you. This is about shining a light on a system that allows abuse to go unchecked. It will create pressure, and accountability will follow." The first news clip played. A polished anchor, voice steady, images of the terminal crowd frozen on screen. In a startling incident at Metro City Airport yesterday, a first-class passenger, later identified as CEO of Lawson Airlines, was detained and questioned by Officer Craig Benson. Witnesses say she followed protocol and was unjustly stopped, allegedly due to her race. Mariah's jaw tightened. Every word, every phrase mattered. Damon's voice was calm but urgent. "We need statements from witnesses. Passenger recordings, flight attendants, anyone who can corroborate the account. This will prevent any misrepresentation." Her phone vibrated incessantly. Messages poured in, colleagues, friends, journalists seeking comment. A few were malicious, questioning if she had provoked the incident. Most, however, expressed outrage and support. "This is bigger than one person," Damon reminded her. "It's a narrative about systemic injustice. You're the focal point, but the story resonates broadly." Meanwhile, Benson was beginning to grasp the consequences. His phone rang constantly. Internal affairs, union representatives, airport administrators. His denial faltered as the viral wave of public scrutiny mounted. He had imagined this as a minor assertion of authority, a routine gate incident. Instead, the footage, combined with passenger accounts, made him a national story overnight. Mariah's assistant, Lena, leaned over her desk. "People are sharing everything. Tweets, TikToks, live streams. Even your employees at other hubs are posting support." She hesitated, voice trembling. "It's overwhelming." Mariah's eyes softened briefly. "It is overwhelming, but this is necessary. If people don't see this, nothing changes. Silence protects the powerful, and I refuse to be silent." Later, Damon arranged interviews with national news networks. Mariah's statements were precise, measured, and emotionally charged. Cameras focused on her calm expression, her composed yet determined tone. "I am not speaking for myself," she said. "I am speaking for everyone subjected to profiling, microaggressions, and unchecked abuse of authority. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability, dignity, and systemic change." Off-air, Damon whispered, "You're doing brilliantly. Keep your composure. This is powerful." Mariah exhaled, resting her hand on the recording she had made at the terminal. Every detail mattered. The tone of Benson's voice, the posture of his hands, the microaggressions. All of it was public now, visible to everyone, undeniable. Meanwhile, social media commentary exploded. Airline passengers from other cities share their own experiences of racial profiling. The hashtag gained momentum, trending nationally. Outrage was palpable. Influencers, journalists, and advocates amplified the story. Each retweet and share multiplied the pressure on authorities to act. Back at Metro City Airport, internal conversations were frantic. Administrators debated disciplinary measures. Benson, for the first time, faced skepticism from his colleagues. Conversations meant to defend him faltered under the weight of evidence and public scrutiny. Rumors circulated. Internal memos, audio clips, and eyewitness accounts surfaced on forums and Twitter threads. Mariah's emotions were conflicted. Relief mingled with fatigue, satisfaction with lingering trauma. Damon noticed. This is emotional, yes, but you need to stay focused. You can't control public reaction, but you can guide the narrative. Keep clarity, keep facts, keep composure. Later, Mariah appeared in a live interview on a morning network. The anchor, professional but curious, asked pointed questions. Ms. Lawson, how did you feel when Officer Benson stopped you? Calmly, Mariah replied, voice steady. It was humiliating. I was singled out for no reason but my skin. But more than personal humiliation, it revealed a systemic problem, one that affects countless people every day. This isn't just my story. It's a mirror of a larger societal issue, one that demands accountability. The anchor nodded. And the airline? How are they responding? Mariah glanced toward Damon, then back to the camera. The airline has acknowledged the incident and is cooperating fully with authorities. But public awareness is essential. Systems alone do not prevent abuse. Accountability and transparency do. That's what we aim to achieve. Outside, the terminal remained busy, yet invisible shifts had begun. Passengers, staff, and even colleagues of Benson spoke quietly among themselves. Conversations acknowledged wrongdoing, discussed policy reforms, and debated the ethics of authority unchecked by oversight. A subtle ripple of change began, unassuming but undeniable. Benson sat in a private office, scrolling through articles, videos, and social media posts. His face was pale, the veneer of control slipping. His colleagues, who had initially offered mild support, now avoided him. Internal memos emphasized caution, and union representatives urged restraint. But public pressure was relentless. Every clip, every witness, every post intensified scrutiny. His position, once unassailable, felt precarious. Back at the airline, Mariah watched her team respond to messages of solidarity. Employees who had been hesitant or fearful now expressed pride, admiration, and commitment. The atmosphere shifted subtly from tension to collective strength. She realized the significance. Her courage had inspired others to speak, to document, to refuse silence. Damon leaned back, voice measured. You see it, right? This isn't just about the incident anymore. It's about cultural awareness, institutional accountability, and the power of witnesses. People are paying attention, and the ripple effect is immense. Mariah nodded slowly. Yes, but it's bittersweet. I'm exhausted, and yet I can't rest. The work isn't over. Even if Benson faces consequences, the larger system remains. Damon's eyes softened. That's why you need to pace yourself. You're a catalyst, not a solution to every problem. But this moment is significant. You've amplified voices, brought attention to injustice, and forced accountability into the public eye. That's real change. Mariah exhaled, letting the weight of it settle. She reviewed clips of passengers recounting what they saw, the whispered warnings, the awkward glances, the small acts of silent protest. Each one mattered. Each one was a thread in the larger tapestry of exposure and justice. Late into the evening, as the viral storm continued to unfold, Mariah sat quietly. The world had taken notice. Officer Benson's actions were no longer private, no longer isolated. Public scrutiny ensured that the story could not be rewritten, that truth finally had a platform. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, a persistent ache remained. The humiliation, the fear, the systemic abuse, these could not be erased entirely. Mariah pressed her hand over the small badge on her purse, a symbol of her professional identity and resilience. She had survived the confrontation, leveraged her evidence, and galvanized public awareness. But the emotional cost was real, lingering like a shadow. Damon broke the silence. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow is another day. Internal reviews, statements, interviews. But tonight, this is a victory, however small, and it sets the stage for the accountability that must follow. Mariah allowed herself a brief smile. Small victory, she whispered, but it's a start. The notifications continued to flood in, the hum of the city outside her office windows faint but persistent. The world had seen, and now it mattered. Justice was no longer abstract, no longer deferred. It was immediate, public, and undeniable. The glass-walled boardroom overlooked the airport's main runway, where planes taxi with indifferent precision. Mariah Lawson sat at the head of the table, laptop open, a stack of files beside her, and Damon Fields at her side. Around her, senior executives and legal advisors of Lawson Airlines gathered, their faces a mix of concern, determination, and cautious optimism. "Thank you all for coming," Mariah began, voice calm but carrying the authority she was known for. "We're here because Officer Benson's actions have created a public incident. Yes, but more importantly, they expose a systemic failure. Our response must be thorough, measured, and transparent." A young executive, Tanya Reynolds, spoke up. "Ma'am, the media coverage is intense. The footage is everywhere. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly in your favor. But if we don't act quickly and strategically, the airport authorities could try to manage the narrative before we have a say." Mariah nodded. "Exactly. That's why we'll engage both internally and externally. Internally with the airline, ensuring our staff are supported and that the airline's response is coordinated. Externally, we make sure the public sees the facts, not a sanitized or distorted version." Damon walked them through the legal strategy. Damon cleared his throat. "First, a formal internal complaint will be filed with Metro City Airport's Internal Affairs. Officer Benson's actions will be documented, assessed, and escalated. Second, we will coordinate with the airline's PR team to release factual statements, emphasizing that this was an abuse of authority and not a reflection of airline policy or passenger conduct. Third, passenger and employee witness statements will be compiled and submitted. Finally, we will ensure that if Benson attempts to contest or deny the incident, the evidence is incontrovertible." Mariah added, "And we had the advantage of timing. The footage is already viral. Public opinion is leaning heavily toward accountability. If we act decisively, we can amplify the pressure on the authorities and ensure that justice is not just a statement. It's a consequence." A senior counsel, Marcus Allen, leaned forward. "Ms. Lawson, this puts us in a delicate position. On one hand, your position gives us leverage. On the other, we must be careful not to appear retaliatory or self-serving. The optics are critical." Mariah's eyes hardened, gaze sweeping the room. "Optics are secondary to principle. We are leveraging our corporate position not to intimidate, but to ensure that bias and abuse of power do not go unchecked." Officer Benson acted publicly and recklessly. The airline has both a moral and legal obligation to respond appropriately. Tanya's voice was tentative. "Some employees are afraid of backlash, ma'am. They want to support you, but worry about personal consequences." Mariah leaned forward. "They should not be afraid. Silence protects the powerful. Courage protects the system. Every employee who supports the truth is part of the accountability chain, and we will ensure they are protected, both legally and professionally." A pause settled over the room, the weight of her words sinking in. Damon nodded toward Mariah. "The next step is direct engagement. Contact the airport's administration, request a formal meeting, and outline the legal and ethical implications of ignoring this incident. Emphasize that the public eye is watching. This isn't just about one passenger. It's about institutional credibility." Mariah pressed her fingers together, then leaned back. "We'll also leverage our communications team. Carefully crafted statements, highlighting systemic accountability, not personal vengeance. Public perception matters, yes, But integrity matters more. Every release, every interview must reinforce that this is about justice and fairness, not personal vendetta. Marcus Allen cleared his throat. Are you planning to confront Benson directly? Mariah's eyes narrowed slightly. Eventually, but not yet. Let the system work first. Let documentation, witnesses, and public scrutiny do the heavy lifting. He underestimates me, and that's his mistake. Damon added, direct confrontation too early could backfire. We need the legal framework, the PR control, and the momentum of public opinion on our side. When Benson realizes the scope of exposure, his leverage disappears. The executives nodded, taking notes, absorbing the strategy. Mariah's plan was precise, calculated, and emotionally intelligent. Pressure without personal vengeance, leverage without exploitation, and public accountability, without losing moral high ground. Later that afternoon, she met with several airline staff members who had been witnesses in the terminal. They were nervous, hesitant, unsure of speaking out publicly. Your voices matter, Mariah said softly but firmly. You observed injustice. You saw abuse of power. What you say now will not only support the evidence, but also help ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. One attendant, Maria Gonzalez, spoke tentatively. I just took out my phone. I wasn't sure if I should, but I recorded some of the interaction. Good, Mariah said, nodding. Your recording is valuable, not just as evidence, but as testimony. You were witnesses. Your courage matters, and you'll be supported every step of the way. Another staffer, a young man named Kevin, added, voice quivering, I was scared. I didn't know if I should step in. But seeing how calm you were, how you refused to be intimidated, it gave me courage. Mariah offered a small smile. It's not about me. It's about what's right. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it. Damon watched quietly, impressed by her composure. She's inspiring people, even indirectly, he murmured. Back in the boardroom, Mariah addressed the airline executives again. We have leverage, yes, but leverage comes with responsibility. We're not using this for profit, publicity, or reputation management. We're using it to enforce accountability, to protect our employees and passengers, and to signal clearly that abuse of power, racial bias, and harassment are unacceptable. Tanya interjected. Ma'am, have you considered how this will affect airport relations? They might resist if we push too hard. I considered it, Mariah replied, voice firm. But ethical action is a negotiation. If they resist, that's their problem. We're obligated to act on principle, not convenience. Public scrutiny is already applying pressure. We are not the aggressors. The system is failing, and we are responding appropriately. Damon added, timing is critical. We coordinate with media releases, witness statements, and internal memos to maximize transparency. Benson will understand, eventually, that this is beyond his control. He's no longer the one setting the terms. Public exposure is... Mariah leaned back, exhaling slowly. The city skyline outside reflected the setting sun, casting long shadows across the boardroom. She allowed herself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. Strategic leverage, combined with meticulous planning, had put her in a position of power. Power she would wield responsibly, deliberately, ethically. Late into the evening, as the viral storm continued to unfold, Mariah sat quietly. The world had taken notice. Officer Benson's actions were no longer private, no longer isolated. Public scrutiny ensured that the story could not be rewritten, that truth finally had a platform. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, a persistent ache remained. The humiliation, the fear, the systemic abuse, these could not be erased entirely. Mariah pressed her hand over the small badge on her purse, a symbol of her professional identity and resilience. She had survived the confrontation, leveraged her evidence, and galvanized public awareness. But the emotional cost was real, lingering like a shadow. Damon broke the silence. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow is another day, internal reviews, statements, interviews. But tonight, this is a victory, however small. And it sets the stage for the accountability that must follow. Mariah allowed herself a brief smile. Small victory, she whispered, but it's a start. The notifications continued to flood in, the hum of the city outside her office windows faint but persistent. The world had seen, and now it mattered. Justice was no longer abstract, no longer deferred. It was immediate, public, and undeniable. But beneath the calm, she felt emotional residue. Anger, exhaustion, frustration. Leveraging influence was necessary, yes, but it came with emotional cost. Every meeting, every conversation, every calculated move demanded energy, composure, and vigilance. She pressed a hand to her forehead, momentarily closing her eyes. This isn't just a battle against one officer, she thought. It's a battle against a system that allows him to exist in the first place. Damon broke the silence. We're ready to move forward. You have the leverage, the evidence, and the witnesses. The next step is coordination with internal affairs and the public narrative. When he realizes the full scope, he won't know what hit him. Mariah opened her eyes, her resolve steady. Good. Let's make sure the system is forced to act. Officer Benson is just the beginning. This has to ripple through the institution. People need to understand that bias, abuse, and impunity have consequences. She glanced at her team, her staff, Damon, and the executives. Every eye in the room reflected determination. Every gesture, note, and nod reinforced that they were aligned, prepared, and morally unshakable. And in that moment, Mariah knew leverage, when wielded correctly, was more powerful than fear, intimidation, or prejudice. Benson had miscalculated. He had underestimated her composure, her strategy, and her ability to marshal both legal and corporate influence. By the time he understood the full weight of exposure, public scrutiny, and institutional accountability, it would be too late. For now, she smiled faintly, not in triumph but in quiet, resolute anticipation. The storm she had set in motion was gathering momentum, and nothing could stop it. The newsroom lights were harsh, white, relentless, reflecting off the polished steel desks. Mariah Lawson sat at a small table, Damon Field beside her, as cameras, microphones, and journalists buzzed around, asking questions with eager urgency. The terminal incident had become a national story overnight, and the media frenzy showed no sign of slowing. Ms. Lawson, what do you say to those who claim this is an isolated incident? A reporter asked, notepad poised. Mariah's expression was calm, her voice steady. This isn't isolated. It's systemic. It's about a pattern of abuse where authority is unchecked and prejudice disguises itself as procedure. People of color experience this every day. This was just captured on camera. The journalist scribbled furiously. Another reporter leaned in. Do you think Officer Benson will face consequences? Consequences are already underway, she replied. Public accountability is powerful, but legal and institutional procedures will ensure that justice is seen and enforced. This isn't about revenge. It's about correcting a wrong and preventing future abuses. Behind the cameras, Damon whispered, the narrative is in our favor. Keep calm, factual, and forceful. Mariah nodded, eyes flicking to her phone. Messages from passengers, airline staff, and witnesses were streaming in. Many offered support. Some detailed additional microaggressions they had witnessed from airport personnel. Each message added weight to the mounting evidence against Benson. Meanwhile, at the airport, Benson sat in his office, blinds drawn, staring at screens displaying every clip, tweet, and news segment that mentioned him. His face was pale, eyes darting nervously. Union representatives were pressing him to issue a statement, but he had none that wouldn't sound offensive or incriminating. His colleague, Officer Reynolds, walked in cautiously. Craig, you need to respond. The public is relentless. Benson ran a hand through his hair, voice tight. I didn't do anything wrong. It was protocol. Protocol does explain the viral footage, Reynolds interrupted. Or the witness statements. Or the CEO herself going public. This isn't just an internal complaint anymore. The whole system is watching. The weight of exposure pressed down on him. Authority that once felt absolute now felt fragile, brittle, ready to crack under scrutiny. Back in the studio, Mariah faced a panel of journalists in a round-table discussion. Questions came fast, sharp, probing her professional and personal perspective. Did you feel unsafe? One asked. Yes, she admitted. But more than that, I felt invisible. My authority, my achievements, my dignity, all disregarded because of assumptions tied to race. That invisibility is dangerous and it's pervasive. Another reporter leaned forward, and the airline's response? Mariah's gaze was firm. We've taken decisive steps internally, ensuring support for staff and passengers, compiling witness statements, and coordinating with legal authorities. But more importantly, we're highlighting that silence protects bias and transparency enforces accountability. Meanwhile, social media campaigns escalated. Hashtag accountability for Benson trended nationwide. Influencers, advocacy groups, and concerned citizens amplified Mariah's story. Viral clips from passengers' phones showed her calm, composed defiance as Benson overstepped his authority, his hands trembling as he gestured toward her in the terminal. Benson's superiors finally convened a meeting. Internal affairs representatives, HR officials, and airport administrators debated the officer's fate. His denial faltered under the weight of evidence, witness testimony, and public outrage. His conduct was unprofessional, one senior administrator said, and the public exposure leaves us no choice. We must pursue formal disciplinary action immediately. Benson's defense was thin, shaky, fading under scrutiny. The union attempted to mediate, but even they couldn't counter the tidal wave of evidence and public pressure. For the first time, he realized that authority without accountability was meaningless. Back in the studio, Mariah answered questions about broader implications. This is a call for systemic change. Bias and authority doesn't just harm one individual. It erodes trust, undermines institutions, and silences countless others who lack visibility or power. Her calm authority resonated. She wasn't just offending herself. She was channeling the voices of everyone affected by systemic abuse, giving them representation, strength, and visibility. Outside the airport, a group of passengers who had witnessed the terminal incident gathered to discuss statements for internal investigations. Mariah had requested their participation, ensuring that the first-hand accounts were officially recorded. Their testimony painted a vivid picture. Benson's selective scrutiny, microaggressions, and intimidation documented in real time. One witness, a middle-aged man, admitted hesitance. I didn't know if I should step forward, he said. But seeing her stand calm, despite everything, it made me realize silence is complicity. Mariah smiled faintly, acknowledging his courage. You've done the right thing. Witnessing is powerful, but acting on what you witness ensures accountability. Damon placed a hand on her shoulder. You've shifted the balance. Public opinion, witness statements, documentation. Everything is aligned. The collapse is inevitable. Mariah's gaze lingered on Benson, figuratively speaking, as though she could see him to the courtroom, the Internal Affairs office, and the viral clips on social media. His posture in those videos, rigid, defensive, fumbling, betrayed him more than words ever could. The airline's internal investigation report was delivered the next day. It was thorough, meticulous, and damning. Each action of Benson was cataloged, every microaggression, every procedural overreach highlighted. Recommendations included immediate suspension, retraining, and review of all prior conduct. Benson read the report, disbelief etched into every line of his face. The combination of public scrutiny, legal documentation, and internal acknowledgement made denial impossible. For the first time, he felt powerless, a sensation he had never imagined. Back at her office, Mariah received confirmation that Internal Affairs had begun formal disciplinary proceedings. The news was careful, procedural, but unavoidable. Benson would face the consequences of his actions. She allowed herself a moment of reflection, briefly closing her eyes. Relief mingled with fatigue. The confrontation, the viral storm, the media scrutiny, the legal strategy. It had all culminated in exposure and collapse. Justice, measured and systemic, was unfolding. Damon leaned in, quietly. It's a victory, yes. But remember, the emotional toll is real. Don't underestimate the exhaustion, the stress, the lingering trauma. You've been through a storm. Mariah opened her eyes, gaze steady. I know, but this proves that accountability is possible. That courage, documentation, and strategic leverage can confront abuse and bias, even when it feels impossible. Outside the office window, the city moved on, Flights took off, passengers boarded, life continued. Yet beneath the surface, the tremor of change had begun. Policies would be reviewed, authority would be questioned, witnesses would be emboldened, and one officer, once unchallenged, now understood the limits of unchecked power. Mariah allowed herself a faint smile. Not triumph, not gloating, but recognition. The system had shifted, and while one battle had been won, the work of vigilance, awareness, and advocacy would continue. Damon broke the silence. Tomorrow, Internal Affairs meets. Benson will have to answer publicly. Social media is still buzzing. You need rest, but stay prepared. The next steps will be crucial. Mariah leaned back, eyes on the sunset streaking across the city skyline. I'll rest when the system is better than it was yesterday. Until then, vigilance, clarity, and truth. The collapse of Officer Benson's facade was complete. His authority, once absolute in his mind, was now diminished, scrutinized, and challenged at every level. And Mariah Lawson, calm, composed, resolute, stood at the center of it, not as a tyrant, not as an avenger, but as a catalyst for justice. For the first time since the terminal confrontation, she allowed herself a deep, steady breath. The storm had passed, but its echoes would continue, ensuring that accountability was no longer optional. The boardroom was silent, except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged for weeks. Officer Craig Benson sat at the far end of a long table, the weight of internal affairs and public scrutiny pressing down on him. For the first time, the uniform he had once worn with authority felt heavy, constrictive, almost symbolic of the power he had misused. Mariah Lawson entered with Damon Fields and a few key witnesses, her presence commanding attention. Passengers, airline staff, and legal representatives filled the room, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and quiet triumph. Benson's jaw tightened. "Ms. Lawson," he said, voice brittle. This is excessive." Mariah met his gaze calmly. "Excessive? No. Necessary. Your actions, documented, publicized, and witnessed, require accountability. What you call excessive is simply the weight of consequences catching up with you." The lead investigator cleared his throat. "Officer Benson, we have reviewed all evidence, including video footage, witness statements, and internal protocols. Your behavior violated multiple procedures, and there is clear evidence of racial bias influencing your actions. We recommend immediate suspension pending further action." Benson's fists clenched. "This is ridiculous. I was following procedure." Procedure," Mariah interrupted, voice precise, "does not grant immunity for morality. Authority is not a shield for prejudice. Every step you took was observed, recorded, and judged, both by the system and by the public." A flight attendant, Maria Gonzalez, stepped forward. "I witnessed the entire incident. You singled her out. You humiliated her. I was scared to speak up, but now I see that silence protects people like you. I refuse to be silent." Another staffer, Kevin, nodded. "Me too. I didn't step in then, but I'm stepping up now. Your abuse of power isn't invisible anymore." Benson's shoulders slumped slightly, the first cracks in his facade. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but none came. The room was heavy with quiet judgment, the weight of witnesses tangible. Mariah leaned forward, voice soft but cutting. "Craig, you underestimated the power of truth and the courage of those who refuse to be silent. You thought authority alone could protect you, but exposure, accountability, and collective witness dismantle that illusion." Outside, the hum of the terminal reminded everyone that life went on, but inside, the moral universe was correcting itself. Damon whispered to Mariah, voice low, "You've given them no room to manipulate, no room to evade responsibility. The evidence is overwhelming. The collapse is complete." Benson's mind raced, the realization of his vulnerability settling in. Public exposure, media coverage, and the legal system had cornered him. His colleagues avoided his gaze. Internal Affairs maintained a steady watch, and every witness reinforced a narrative of accountability. The lead investigator continued. "We will submit a full report recommending formal termination, retraining, and review of past conduct." Additionally, mandatory bias awareness training is required for all officers at this terminal. We are setting a precedent. Mariah nodded. Precedent is critical. Authority unchecked is dangerous. Bias tolerated erodes trust. This isn't just about me. It's about every passenger, every employee, every person subjected to the same treatment silently. Let this be a turning point. Benson's face paled, his lips pressed into a thin line. He had imagined himself untouchable, a figure whose power was absolute. Now, that illusion was shattered. He opened his mouth, but no words of defense carried weight. A journalist from a national outlet stepped forward. Ms. Lawson, do you have a statement regarding the broader implications for systemic bias in airport security and law enforcement? Mariah's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of every witness, every employee. This story isn't just about one officer. It's about the patterns that allow bias to operate under the guise of procedure. Today, one person faces consequences. Tomorrow, the system must continue to evolve to protect integrity, fairness, and dignity. The media cameras flashed as she spoke. Damon's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a silent affirmation of support. Benson finally slumped fully into his chair, the weight of exposure and public scrutiny pressing down. His colleagues shifted uncomfortably, no one offering solace. He had lost control. His authority, once absolute in his mind, had been dismantled by evidence, witnesses, and strategic exposure. Mariah watched silently, noting the subtle details, the tightening of his jaw, the avoidance of eye contact, the small, involuntary tremor in his hands. Poetic justice was not violent. It was a collapse of false authority under the weight of truth. Later, as the internal affairs report was finalized, Benson was formally suspended pending termination. The news circulated rapidly, amplified by social media and news outlets. Public opinion celebrated the accountability achieved, highlighting the systemic issues and calling for ongoing vigilance. Mariah reflected privately in her office, the hum of the city below a distant echo. Her hands rested on the desk, fingers intertwined. Relief was tempered with exhaustion, the emotional cost of weeks of confrontation and exposure settling into her chest. Damon spoke gently. You've done more than just hold one officer accountable. You've sparked awareness, encouraged witnesses to act, and forced institutional change. That's rare and it's impactful. Mariah allowed herself a faint smile. Impactful, yes, but the fatigue is real. The fear, the stress, the constant vigilance, those don't disappear. This is only one victory. The broader system still needs attention. Damon nodded. True, but victories, even partial ones, are crucial. They show what's possible when courage meets strategy and accountability is enforced. You've set a precedent others can follow. Mariah leaned back, eyes on the city skyline, letting the moment settle. The airport terminal outside resumed its rhythm, planes taking off and landing, passengers moving to security, lives unfolding. Yet beneath the surface, change had begun. Policies were being reviewed, officers retrained, and the institution had been forced to reckon with its failures. Her phone buzzed, a message from one of the passengers who had witnessed the incident. Thank you for standing up. You made a difference. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet affirmation that her actions, while personally taxing, had created ripples of accountability. Later that evening, Mariah walked to the terminal herself, observing passengers, staff, and officers. There was still tension in the air, subtle but noticeable, a cautious respect from officers, a quiet empowerment among staff. The small changes were visible. Eye contact, polite acknowledgement, a sense of awareness that hadn't existed before. She paused by the gate where the incident had occurred weeks earlier. The leather chair was empty, the hum of engines filling the space. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling the fear, the humiliation, and the strength it had taken to confront authority publicly. A young flight attendant approached, voice soft. Ms. Lawson, thank you. You didn't just defend yourself, you defended all of us. Mariah smiled, voice quiet. We defended ourselves together. Courage is contagious, and accountability relies on witnesses, not just victims. Weeks had passed since Officer Benson's suspension became public. Metro City Airport had implemented new training protocols, accountability measures, and oversight committees. Yet Mariah Lawson felt the weight of the past still pressing against her. Sitting in her corner office, overlooking the runway, she watched planes taxi and take off. Each departure a reminder that life moved on, even as the echoes of injustice lingered. Mariah, the media wants an update, Damon Field said, placing a tablet on her desk. They're interested in your thoughts on institutional change, not just Benson's downfall. Mariah took a deep breath, fingers tracing the edge of her laptop. They'll need more than words. They'll need examples. Change isn't just policy. It's cultural. It's awareness. It's empowering witnesses to speak without fear. Damon nodded. Exactly. And your story has already ignited that conversation nationwide. People are listening. Employees, passengers, even other airlines are paying attention. Your experience isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a blueprint for accountability. Mariah's gaze drifted to the tarmac, where a young officer waved at passengers boarding a plane. She recognized the careful professionalism in his movements, the subtle attentiveness, the absence of arrogance or microaggression. Small signs, but they mattered. The lesson had begun to ripple outward. Later that morning, she met with airport administrators and internal affairs representatives. The atmosphere was tense, polite, but edged with acknowledgement of change. Ms. Lawson, your input has been invaluable, said Deputy Director Linda Harmon. We've revised training protocols, introduced bias awareness workshops, and implemented more stringent oversight. Officer Benson's case has become a catalyst for wider institutional reform. Mariah nodded. I appreciate the efforts, but these measures must be more than symbolic. Employees, passengers, and officers must feel empowered to act, to report, and to correct abuse in real time. Otherwise, we're back at square one. Harmon's eyes met hers, understanding and respect mingling. We hear you. The process will be ongoing. We will continue monitoring and refining our approach. After the meeting, Mariah stepped into the terminal, moving through the crowds as though observing a living system. She saw staff interacting differently, officers more conscious of their demeanor. Passengers who once felt invisible now acknowledged politely, respectfully. Small victories, incremental but undeniable. A young flight attendant approached, eyes bright. Ms. Lawson, I just want to say, seeing what you did, it changed how I see my role. I feel more confident standing up, documenting, supporting passengers when needed. Mariah offered a faint smile. That's exactly why we do this. Accountability isn't just reactive, it's empowering. Courage is contagious. Damon joined her, nodding toward the bustling terminal. Look at them. Small shifts, but they'll multiply. Culture changes one decision, one witness, one voice at a time. Mariah's mind wandered to Benson. He had faced public exposure, internal investigations, and professional humiliation. His suspension had been made permanent, and he was now in a retraining program designed to confront systemic bias. She wondered if he truly understood the gravity of his actions, or if he would carry a grudging awareness into the future. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Lawson Airline CEO advocates for systemic change following terminal incident. The article praised her composure, her strategic approach, and her role in fostering awareness nationwide. The public narrative had shifted entirely. Where once she had been a victim of racial profiling, she was now a recognized agent of change. Yet, amidst the accolades, Mariah felt the lingering weight of trauma. The humiliation, fear, and emotional strain had left traces in her chest. Courage had carried her through, but the scars remained. Later that evening, Mariah convened her core airline team in the headquarters conference room. We've achieved accountability, she began, voice steady, eyes meeting each team member. Benson faced consequences. The public knows the truth, and our policies have changed. But our work isn't done. Institutional change is ongoing. Every employee must feel empowered to report, to document, to intervene when necessary. Culture only shifts when every individual participates. Tanya Reynolds spoke softly. Ma'am, seeing what happened, seeing how you handled it, I think we all realize the importance of vigilance. Not just policies, but courage. Mariah nodded. Exactly. courage in the moment, and consistency afterward. We can't let fear dictate actions, and we can't allow privilege to mask bias. Outside, the airport moved with renewed energy. Passengers filed through gates. Staff interacted with deliberate care, and even new officers appeared conscious of the culture's shift. Each interaction carried the subtle imprint of accountability, visible yet unobtrusive. Later, she received a call from one of the journalists who had covered the story from the start. "Ms. Lawson, would you comment on the nationwide conversation this has sparked?" Mariah paused, thoughtful. "Yes, this is about awareness, accountability, and empowerment. One officer's actions expose systemic issues, but one person's courage, supported by witnesses and the public, can catalyze change. We must continue to document, speak up, and demand integrity at every level." Damon, listening from her office doorway, whispered, "You've changed the narrative. Permanently." Mariah nodded slowly. "Maybe, but vigilance never ends. Systems will always test integrity." The work continues long after the headlines fade. She hung up and stepped into the observation deck, overlooking the runway. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. A plane lifted into the sky, ascending steadily. She felt a deep sense of calm mixed with resolve. The emotional cost of the past weeks was real, but the impact was undeniable. Her phone vibrated again, another passenger's message. "Because of you, I feel seen. Thank you." She smiled faintly, voice soft. "No, thank you. Witnessing matters as much as being witnessed." Damon joined her on the observation deck. It's rare to see such direct, systemic impact from one person's actions. Mariah's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. It's not just me. It's the witnesses, the staff, the public. Accountability requires collective courage. Silence settled between them, comfortable and reflective. The hum of the terminal below reminded them that life, unchecked and continuous, moved forward. But the ripple of change had begun, undeniable and lasting. Later that night, as Mariah prepared to leave, she paused at the empty gate where the incident had occurred. The leather chair, the hum of the terminal, the faint echoes of a past confrontation. They were all reminders. She had endured humiliation, fear, and systemic bias. She had faced authority misused and turned it into exposure and accountability. Her reflection in the polished window caught her attention. She saw fatigue, yes, but also determination and resilience. Courage had carried her. Strategy had amplified her impact, and witnesses had reinforced her truth. Benson's fall had been public and precise. Yet Mariah knew the deeper victory lay not in personal vindication, but in systemic awareness. Policies had changed, culture had shifted, and countless voices, once silenced, had been amplified. As she walked away, Damon beside her, she reflected on the journey, the confrontation, the viral exposure, the corporate strategy, the internal investigations, the media attention. Each step had carried weight. Each decision had consequences. And through it all, the central truth remained. Abuse of power could be challenged, prejudice could be exposed, and accountability was possible. Benson, meanwhile, faced the first real repercussions of his actions. His suspension, pending termination, public exposure, and internal scrutiny dismantled his authority. He had learned, painfully and publicly, that power without integrity is fragile and easily undone. Mariah Lawson, poised and resolute, had ensured that the lesson was unmistakable, not through vengeance, but through exposure, strategy, and moral clarity. Justice had been served. The system, imperfect but responsive under pressure, had acted. And while the personal cost lingered, the ethical victory was undeniable. As she exited the terminal, sunlight streaked across the runway, planes taking off into the sky. She allowed herself one final deep breath, a mixture of relief, resolve, and quiet triumph. She whispered to herself, a quiet affirmation. Justice isn't instant. It's deliberate, cumulative, and moral. Today, one person learned that misuse of power has consequences. Tomorrow, the system continues to evolve, and we, witnesses, survivors, and advocates, will ensure it does. As she walked through the terminal one final time that evening, she felt a subtle change in the air. Officers moved with conscious care. Staff engaged with purpose, and passengers were treated with respect. Small, human interactions, yet monumental in their implications. The echoes of abuse had been replaced by the resonance of accountability. Mariah Lawson had not only survived the storm, she had turned it into momentum, and as the city lights flickered across the runway, she allowed herself a rare, quiet smile. Poetic justice was no longer abstract. It was lived, witnessed, and embedded in the system. The ripple had begun, and there was no turning back.